All right, so I told them here at Mitsubishi Motors, at MOD, Mitsubishi Owners Day. Yeah. So I told them about the engine swap, and they said it doesn't get me in, but they did give me a free wristband to go in and out. So that's really awesome of them. Mad appreciation for that. I do see security over here looking, and I don't know what they're doing. They're just staring off into the sunset.
What's up? Yeah. What's going on?
All right, that was legit. So I got in. Currently right now we have our own custom wiring harness. However, power steering won't work, and I have two theories on that. One, I think the power steering is going to need some sort of RPM input to confirm that the engine is running. And the other thing is that I believe that the wheel speed sensors also have some effect on the power steering because it has a variable power steering. So if I only do the RPM, then the power steering is going to work, but it's going to think I'm basically in park the whole time. So I do need to get the wheel speed sensors hooked up. That's a whole different issue. That's a lot more complicated. My theory here is I'm going to add in this externally to the crank. And this sensor is going to pick it up, and I'm going to mount this externally on the crankshaft as well. The intent here is to get the engine itself to produce its own RPM signal the same way that the Mini Cooper wants to see it. But the whole point here is that I'll be able to use this OEM ECU hooked up to the original harness that goes to the AWD to everything basically. Connect the ECU to that, extend the wiring harness so it's somewhere more convenient, and that is going to generate all the CAN bus signals that we need to control the power steering, to control the tachometer on the dash. Potentially we can hook up all the other sensors as well, but I think that the power steering is going to be a little bit more important than having the OBD2 reading boost pressure and all that kind of stuff. A little bit circumventing, kind of more complicated, I think, than it needs to be. If I was a programmer, then I'd be able to do it just fine with the CAN bus setup coming out of the Speedometer ECU, but I'm not that good with computer programming. So this is my mechanical workaround. So this is the camshaft from Mini Cooper. Is we are using that identifier key, basically the trigger wheel for the cam. I have a new sensor, I have a wiring harness, I have the stock ECU, so I should be able to get this to trigger the cam position, but in order to get this camshaft to be adapted to the camshaft on this engine, chop this up and use this outer piece as a little bit of a washer. I'll probably turn it a little bit out on the lathe, cut it shorter, and basically get it to sit like a washer, and then mount a sensor that can trigger on it. Go ahead and put it back on the lathe and see if we can bore this out to 12 millimeters to fit our M12 bolt. And I've got a replacement M12 1.25 by 55, and that's accounting for the extra spacing. It's a little boring, but you gotta tighten it down and torque it to spec. We gotta make sure that we center that washer in the back there too before we clamp it all down. Now we have clearanced our timing cover as well. I just broke it off, so it's old and crunchy. So if I get a new one and a nicer one, I'll be able to cut that properly. So we gotta realign the washers so that they're all center so we don't get any sort of wobble. 63 foot-pounds. So now I need to just get my sensor. We're going to tie into these bolts down here.
Anything? Yes.
Now? Turns out I didn't need the crank position sensor. The RPMs are actually measured off the cam position sensor, from what I can tell. So basically what I did, I hooked up the old ECU, and when I hold the sensor here while the engine is running, it actually measures the RPM on the dashboard. Now that the RPM is on the dashboard, it actually activates the power steering. And then the last part of the puzzle, so I just need that one wire, or sorry, in this case, 3 wires. So I have some other connectors. So my plan is to disconnect this harness, figure out exactly where these 3 wires connect to in here, and then use these old from a junkyard to route through to this, and basically I'll mount this somewhere in the car, extend this one loom from the chassis to the ECU, extend that in, put this in the footwell or something, and then have this one wire out here, and that will take care of RPM, the dash, as well as the power steering, all with that one hookup. Steering input with speed needs the wheel position sensors, which I do have them whenever I change the rear suspension back to the Mini Cooper SUV suspension instead of the custom built that I have. But that's going to take custom axles and everything else. So the most important thing so far has been power steering, and we basically got that accomplished with this. So then now we need to make this functional and hook it up in sort of a more simple context where we're not, obviously we can't drive around like this, so. Alright, so we finally got the RPM working. So obviously it's got a check engine light because it doesn't know why the RPM is the only thing that's going on, but hey, that means we got power steering, and obviously we got our tach to finally work. So I noticed some oil under my car, and looking at the wheel, it's actually like all over the, now obviously it's a gross wheel, I don't care about that, but all this oil and stuff that's in here, I think that oil, thought it was originally from the transmission or the engine or something, but it looks like it's probably from the strut itself, because I don't know how else that top hat is going to be so soaked if it wasn't a blown strut. I've driven it for almost a week and a half now, and that's a shame. My new replacements finally came in. Yeah. Took a couple days, but we're ready to go. Alright, so in order to make this Bilstein shock work just like our mini shock did, we need to do some of the similar modifications. Now, before we chopped off quite a few different things because we weren't sure exactly how we were going to fit this sleeve on there, and I'm going to apply some of the lessons I learned with that to our new one. Currently the car does sit a little bit low, so my intent is to, instead of chopping here where I did before, I'm actually going to chop another 1/2 inch down. And what that's going to allow is for about a 1/2 inch lift on the Mini from where it sits now, which is already about a 2 inch lift from stock. So we're going to be about 2.5 inches up on here. So long story short, I couldn't get this to seal anyway, and I think it's just because it's pretty old and worn down. And I can see quite a bit of grooving in there too, so that definitely doesn't help. So we said, screw it, let's just replace it. And now we have this really nice shiny, and now it's black, I guess, so it doesn't rust or whatever, but way, way, way better. That was dumb. I can get it in, but I can't get it out. Alright, I bent the insert slightly, which is fine. So now it clears. Have it this way, and then our hose will come out there. Alright, here's the final product. Basically trying to get our ECU back in this spot here. In order to do that, we got to run the wires through. But of course, to test everything, we already did our connector. So now we need to use this thin, it's a Japanese pull saw, but it's like a modern one or whatever, not a traditional or anything. And basically we are using it, it cuts less than 1 millimeter wide, which makes it really nice for trying to fit this back together later on. There we go. So now we've got a gap we can pull our wires through. In the attempt to make the Mini not look so much like an RC car, we have pulled off the stock antenna. All right, the way that we're gonna do that, we're gonna cut, and we'll cut it right there. All right, now of course it does look a little funny that way, so we're gonna grab now some vacuum caps, and the whole point of these is to make it look just a little bit more natural. So, not the best, but again, free, easy, and still gives us a radio signal. So, that's what we're gonna do. Ha! It is. Badass. So these are the 1000cc low impedance injectors. Some flow data, like that, and injectors.